Hello, everyone. Is that me? The talk that I'm going to be giving right now is going to be a little bit different type of content than what you've seen before. It's because I'm coming from a different point of view. So the talk is titled From First Screen to Second Screen to No Screen. And what I mean by that is from your personal screen to a shared screen or a borrowed screen and no screens. And the reason why I'm here to talk to you is I'm actually not in marketing at all. I'm in design. And in fact, I'm a design researcher, so I have some sort of empathy for researchers in the audience. The difference between marketing and research design is basically the implications. We use a lot of the same techniques, we use a lot of the same tools, but the implications are dramatically different. So where marketing research looks for implications in marketing and brand and sales, design research looks for implications for defining and designing new products and services. And even with that, in the past few years, there's been quite a bit of overlap. I've worked a lot with marketing researchers, and I've been brought in for marketing research in the past a couple of years as well. So why am I here if I'm not actually in marketing? Well, it's because I've been in the mobile industry for nearly 10 years now. And through that time, I've actually seen quite a bit of change, and I can see where a lot of change is going. Because where I'm at right now is actually an agency, a design agency called Topp in Sweden. And at this agency, we work in the mobile industry, but instead of just working in what it is now, what we're doing is we're defining what the future is by designing experiences for future customers. So our runway for our designs are anywhere between 2 to 5, sometimes even 10 years out. So what we are designing now will be available to your consumers, the people that you guys will be marketing to in 2 to 5 to 10 years. So the way I'm going to talk about this is to talk about trends. Because we are such a forward-looking agency, we have to be aware of trends. But more importantly, we have to be aware of them so that we can actually set the trajectory of some of these trends and reset the trajectory of some of these trends. So today I'm going to talk to you about two really interesting trends that are happening in the mobile industry that are actually changing the definition of the mobile industry. And you guys can think about implications for that for marketing research in 2, 5, 10 years. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is access over ownership. Now this is probably going to sound familiar to anyone who's been watching trends. Does this sound familiar to anyone? The idea that it's more important for people to be able to access content or material rather than necessarily own it. This has been around for a while. So some examples. It's more important that people have access to their music than they necessarily want to go out and purchase the CD or even the digital content anymore. So you have things like Spotify as an example. Or that it's more important that people have access to personalized transportation rather than owning their own car. Especially with millennials, you'll see they're less inclined to actually purchase their own car, and they're fine with something like Uber. Or Netflix. Another great example, access to entertainment beyond your wildest dreams. You could imagine having a library like that at home. It would never fit into even some ridiculous sized homes. So that's access over ownership. That is setting that up. But the trend, a lot of trends analysts, and I would put myself in there, people who are looking forward, think that we've actually just seen the tip of the iceberg for this trend in general. But before I go too far into the future, I want to talk about where has this trend, what's happened in the mobile industry specifically with this trend. So what we have seen so far, if we go back a few years, most of the content actually existed on your phone just a few years ago. So the easiest example is if you lost your phone, you lost your contacts. And yesterday, the 20-somethings were actually ignored in the public polling, but even I remember that. It was not too long ago that when you lost your phone, you lost everything that was on it. But now, what we have today is a lot of services. There's a lot of services out there that actually pull the content off your phone and store it someplace else, somewhere in the cloud. And if you have any content really living on your phone, you're probably behind the times, or you don't know about a particular service that's out there. So if you think about your contacts are actually hosted from your account, whether that's LinkedIn or Facebook or even an email account. Or your notes are stored on something like Evernote in the cloud that you can access through something else. Your photos are on iCloud. Even the settings for your particular mobile phone, they're actually associated to an account which lives in the cloud. So what is your mobile phone if it doesn't really have content? Well, I am going to propose to you that a mobile phone is made up of 3 parts. You have your input, which is like a keyboard or a camera, a way for you to tell the machine something. You have your output, which is the screen or the sounds that come out of your mobile phone. Both of these are essentially the hardware. This is what the actual phone that you purchase. The third part is personalized access. This is you associate your phone to your accounts, and your phone allows you to link to what it is, your content that lives in the cloud. How many people here have switched their phones in the past 12 months? Okay, we've got about half of the crowd have switched their phones in the past 12 months. My argument is that the input and the output systems are actually commodities at this point. And mobile carriers have really taken advantage of this trend of access over ownership, that they push you, even before your plan is up, to try to update your mobile phone. And it's become easier and faster to switch your mobile phones. So if you take away the input and the output, if that is actually a commodity, then what's left of a mobile phone? Well, it's really your access. It is your key. It's your personal identifier. So that's where we are today. And now I'm going to ask you guys to be imaginative and play in the future. This is one of my favorite things to do. So what happens if you don't actually own your input or output, but instead you have access to it? Moving this trend to almost an extreme, what if your access doesn't actually have a screen? What if it's actually like a keychain or something similar where you can take that and borrow a screen as you need it? Because that keychain is what identifies you. You can go to your work and you can borrow a company monitor and actually do your work from there, because it's all coming off of that keychain type thing. Or you can go quickly, mobily, move into a meeting room and use the projector, or perhaps a screen within the table. Or when you're at home, you can use your household TV. Or when you're at a public bus stop, you could actually use a public screen in order to get the contextual information that you need there. That's the type of experiences that we're pushing and that we see in the future. Your mobile phone, and what is mobile, is really your access to your content. And if we take this even one step further, why do you even need a device? I mean, can't you yourself be your access? We've seen biometric technology absolutely take off in the past couple of years, and it's only getting better. Why can't your access actually be an iris scan or your fingerprint, as we see on the iPhone and have for the past few years? There's a Microsoft Cloud commercial that has a wonderful quote, and I don't know if they actually really understand the power of this statement right now. The statement being, it's not the device that is mobile, it is you. And I think maybe Microsoft has a slight idea of what they could do with that, but most of the audience who's receiving this message has no idea what that actually means and what that could mean in 2 to 5 years. And yes, it is that close. So all of this basically begs the question is, does the mobile industry revolve around devices? Does it revolve around your mobile phone? And what I'm proposing is that it actually doesn't. The mobile industry, although right now it revolves around devices, is shifting and will shift over the next few years to revolving around access to your personal data in contextual situations. So that's the first trend that I wanted to bring up. Moving from personal screens to shared screens. But as we talked about before, why does your input and output doesn't necessarily have to be a screen. It could be something like your camera, which is like taking photos, and you don't have to see the results of that right away. It could be voice recognition, as we saw yesterday. It could be lots of different new technologies and new inputs and outputs that are available and being developed. So this brings me to my second trend, which is screenless experiences. And there's been a lot of discussion about screenless or UI-less experiences in the tech industry in the past about 18 months or so to 24 months. And it's partly because there's starting to be a lot of really interesting screenless experiences that we're dealing with, especially IoT, Internet of Things. And under that, you can think about connected home, smart city sensors, and wearables. A lot of wearables don't have screens at all. A lot of these experiences, the objects that you're directly interacting with don't have screens. So we have to figure out how do we allow people to interact with these objects appropriately when they don't have screens. The funny thing is that all of these that we just talked about are still being lumped together with the mobile industry. And there was a question on the panel yesterday about, well, why is IoT considered mobile? And they brought up some really great responses, and I would like to add to that. And that my theory is that it's still lumped with the mobile industry because it always connects back to your mobile phone. The mobile phone tends to be the central hub for all of these experiences, where you control things or where you pull the information and you are, in theory, able to do something with the data that's coming in. But that means that screenless experiences, IoT experience is really only half screenless. So you've got the objects that are screenless, but the central hub is not. The central hub is still on your mobile phone. And because your mobile phone has a screen, it's going to have to be visualized in some way. And this is a choice that innovators and designers have been making over the past, since the beginning of the Internet of Things, about 4 years ago. Well, arguably 4 years ago. And this is, like I said, it's a choice, but the choice has become so automatic that it's actually become an assumption that your hub has to be your mobile phone. However, innovators and designers like myself and the people that are at my agency, we're actually really starting to question, should the hub actually be the mobile phone? And here's why. IoT really is in its infancy. And I have to admit, we've made a lot of mistakes so far, and we're going to continue to make mistakes. But one of the mistakes that we've been making a lot, and we've recently come to the realization, is that IoT experiences are less about individuals and much more so about groups. So what's interesting about an IoT experience, about a smart city experience, is how the entire neighborhood acts as opposed to an individual person within it. So we heard the example yesterday about the bike lanes in Copenhagen, which is the city right next to me, so I'm very familiar with this, that as more bikes come up to the lights will actually favor the bikes as opposed to other traffic. So it's more interesting what happens in a group rather than an individual. The same thing with wearables. Wearables, again, we saw yesterday that some of the reasons why people are choosing to use wearables is to make a statement. And that means the experience is not about only the person who's wearing it, but about the experience for other people around it as well. So it is a group experience. And especially when you look at connected home, this is something that admittedly designers and innovators have made a huge mistake. They've assumed that an individual person lives in a home, but that's not how it actually works. Homes are a shared experience. Homes are for families. And the problem is that the mobile industry as it is today, especially the mobile phone, is so individualistic, ridiculously individualistic. So we end up with these experiences where an entire family experiences the lights in a home, but there's only one person who can really truly control it through their personal phone. And I don't really think that's fair. And a lot of other forward-thinking innovators don't think that's fair anymore. And we're starting to question this. And this is why we're thinking the hub, maybe it shouldn't actually be the mobile phone. So if it's not the mobile phone, what could it be? Well, ideally, this central hub would actually be some contextually intelligent system or machine. This is where we're playing way in the future. We are defining what the actual requirements should be as opposed to working within existing boundaries. So this hub should be truly integrated into our lives. It should be available to the group, even if the group is together or apart. It should be ubiquitous, and it should work with us. Unfortunately, what I just listed, a lot of what our mobile phone experience is today is not that. It's working against us. It demands our attention away from the group. It's not ubiquitous enough. So what could this be? Well, it could be some intelligent system, or it could be maybe some robot. But everything that we think of, it doesn't require that you have a screen. The hub doesn't have to have a screen. And this is where we start to get into something really interesting, because that means that we could actually have devices that don't have screens and the central hub and controllings that don't have screens. And then finally, we're going to have screenless experiences. And that'll make it interesting for marketing research. How do you do a survey with no screens? There's an interesting quote that I heard by an innovator. Her name is Kate Stone. She's based here in London. She was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in Malmö, where I'm from. And the quote is that the future will look more like Mary Poppins in Minority Report. And I was very much inspired by this, because Mary Poppins doesn't have screens. Yet, in that experience, in that movie, or in that book as well, she can control so much, and the objects work together. But there's no screens to do that. It's kind of like magic. And that's the future that we are looking at, that we are designing. So, why did I talk about all this? Well, this was basically to get you guys to think that the mobile industry is changing. In fact, I've been in it for 10 years, and it's never been the same from one day to the next. It's going to continue changing. And I've proposed to you a couple of trends and proposed to you a couple ways in which I think the mobile industry is going to be changing over the next 2 to 5, and beyond that, in the next few years. So one way that I believe it's changing is right now it's very much focused around devices, and that's going to move towards the big data and access to that data. And the second way is that right now it is very individualistic. It's about individuals, whereas I think the mobile industry is going to move towards understanding group contexts. That's all.